morning. Good morning. Good morning. And happy birthday, Mom. I know that you're probably the only person who's tuned in before this started. So thank you. Thank you for that. Welcome to the Vote ATL Leadership Breakfast Series with mayoral candidates. My name is Rohit Malhotra. I'm the Executive Director at the Center for Civic Innovation in Atlanta. I wish you could see the crowd here. It's crazy. We are in a small, just kidding. We are in a small studio with On the Grid Creative to be able to bring this to y'all, but we know that there are a lot of people who are watching at home and will be watching this afterwards. So thank you for tuning in. As many of you know, there is an election on November the 2nd, and the Center for Civic Innovation is an organization that is committed to making sure that folks are informed and engaged in our local elections. Just yesterday, the Center for Civic Innovation celebrated our 7th birthday, and it's so exciting.
Yay.
Yeah, 7. I think, what are we in? What grade would we be in? We'd be in 6th grade? What's the
5th.
5th? I don't know kids at all. So I was going to say, I think we start talking now. Is that the... we are, the Center for Civic Innovation has been around for 7 years. And we are an organization that is focused to make sure that as Atlanta is growing, that we also address its widening inequality that has existed for years and years and years. We do that in 3 ways. One is by making sure that folks know that inequality exists and that they're inspired to do something about it. The second is to invest in grassroots organizations and people who are doing the work. The third is to advocate and push for policy change. This Thursday, we will be publishing one of our first major policy reports around the neighborhood planning units. We'll definitely get into that today, but if you're able to tune in at 4 o'clock, we'll be publishing a study and an evaluation on the neighborhood planning unit system here in Atlanta, the first evaluation that has been done since 1978. Fun fact and really exciting. I wanted to just thank a few folks, and then we'll jump right in. First of all, wanted to make sure we thanked our community partners. Wanted to thank Community Movement Builders out in Pittsburgh, doing amazing work on the ground. Want to thank Kiyomi and the team at the Connect that's doing great work in Westview. And I also want to give a big shout to Blue and Green Consulting with Zara Alabanza and the work that she is doing as well in Ashview Heights. So thank you for the community-based work that y'all are doing. Big shout out as well to Butter ATL. I know y'all are helping us make sure that we get this out into the world in the coolest way possible. I think we'll take over a Taco Bell soon, I think, and talk about the elections. But thank you to them and to, once again, On the Grid Creative. And so we're going to dive right in. We have a series of conversations. It'll be conversational in the beginning, but if you are interested in asking a question, drop it in the chat. You can drop it on Facebook. You can email it to us. You can send it to us on Twitter. You can send it to us on Instagram, wherever you need to. We're not on TikTok, but we'll get there. Maybe by the end of the day today. It'll be great. If you want to drop your questions in there, we'll ask those at the end. So you ready to dive in?
I'm ready.
I'm ready. I love it. So thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that. Remember our last conversation, you're a great interviewer, so I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's when there's good people running for office. So we got a lot of folks who are running this year. Everyone seems like a great person. We just got to figure out who's going to be the next mayor of this city. And
who are you talking to?
All right. All right. So I wanted to start with the same question we start with everybody, which is not your vision for Atlanta, not why you're running for mayor, but why public service? Why do you do this work? What drives you on a day-to-day basis?
Well, it really started in my upbringing. My dad was always very involved, whether it be church or in the neighborhood, in the community. He actually was on the school board in our city at one point and helped other people become on the school board and help fight, particularly when it was school desegregation and my younger brothers had to go to another school. So I watched that, and I watched him doing that. My mother worked for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission as an executive secretary and was always on the battlefield to make sure people, whether it was age or race or other discriminations, really had a voice. And so it's just watching that service. And that even went to my grandparents and others. And so I grew up with a family that was active, involved in service.
Yeah. Where'd you grow up?
Indianapolis, Indiana.
Okay,
yes,
all right.
Yes.
What is there?
What do you mean, what is there? I mean, come on.
Look, I only know Atlanta. I don't know.
Do you know the 500
Is that the little like speedy card things?
Oh yeah. So that's a major thing.
I like to go the speed limit.
And then there's a plethora of sports activities that take place.
Okay, there's like some good basketball in Indiana.
Right. Mm-hmm. Good basketball.
Did you play ball?
No, I did not.
Okay,
I did not. I was growing up right at the time when women were starting to play basketball in the sports.
Got
of course, being tall, people would assume that I did, but I didn't.
Okay, there you go. Indian people are still working on playing basketball, so I think we're good there. And we'll have a little train go by just to say hello. So for you in Indiana, was that something where? Did you have a big family there, small family? What was
So I grew up the only girl, and I had 3 brothers.
3 brothers, older, younger?
1 older and 2 younger.
Okay, got it.
And so I grew up in a small nuclear family, but, my maternal and fraternal grandparents lived there, so it became a little larger of a family in that instance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about your grandparents.
Oh gosh, my grandfather on my mother's side was an awesome man, and he never knew how to read, and it took me a long time to figure that out.
Oh, okay.
I never learned to read, but was able to raise his children by buying property and renting them out, so he was a landlord. And I remember
Airbnb before it was cool.
Exactly. But he was really instrumental. That my mother's mother was a beautician.
Okay.
So I spent many hours, and I spent a lot of time with her. I think I was her favorite child.
There you go.
In the beauty shop, watching her see people from all across the community and the church and everything.
Yeah.
On my father's side, my father's mother had passed long before I was born.
Okay.
But my father's father, I knew, Papa, I called him, very well. He was actually a real estate broker.
Okay.
And owned a small building where he did that trade. And then later, when my father, who was an assembly line worker for Ford Motor Company and a union worker, he kept getting laid off. And his father said, come on now, you need to try to do something else to make money. So he took the other side of the building and opened a convenience store. Okay.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
What was your favorite part of watching the beautician shop? Like, there's like
the conversations the ladies would have, and the fact that there was just such a variety of women and people that came through the shop.
Yeah.
And I just liked watching my grandmother, because I knew she was a business owner and doing business. And so one of the things I used to do is she always had a lot of magazines, and I would sit there for hours just filling out, how they have little forms for you to fill out for stuff, because I wanted to act like I was in business too. So just watching her do that and manage the family as well, because she did it in her home.
Oh, okay.
So it was just the back of the house was a beauty shop, and then she would go in the kitchen and cook great food.
Okay.
And come back and forth. And so watching her manage that, watch me, and also just have the relationship that she had with her customers was really great.
And you got all the tips and tricks and all that.
And then the variety of people in different income levels that would come through there. It was just wonderful.
Yeah. Are there a lot of black folks in Indianapolis?
There's not as many as there are in Atlanta, so that's how I ended up in Atlanta.
Okay, because you were like, I got to go.
Well, let me tell the story. So when I was in high school, we were doing a senior trip of historically black colleges and universities across the country. So, of course, we came to Atlanta because there are a lot of them here.
Yep.
And a group of us were so excited because we heard about this place, Atlanta. And we snuck away from our chaperone, and we got in a cab, and we drove down Camden Road in Southwest Atlanta and went to Cisco's nightclub.
Okay.
And when I walked in there, I thought I had died and woke up in Black Hollywood. I mean, that was like the impression of a lifetime.
Yeah.
And ever since then, it was like, I'm going to move to Atlanta. If I ever leave Indianapolis, this is the place I want to be.
Okay.
And so, of course, that was what propelled me to find a way to Atlanta.
Who would have known that Cisco's nightclub was such an influential landmark?
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it for me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so did you end up going to school here?
No, I did not. I actually went to Central State University in Wilberforce, Ohio. It's an HBCU.
Yep.
It was a couple hours from home, so my parents had me close enough to keep that eye on me. But that's where I went to school. And then after that, I went home for a while. And then I found a long, extended trip to Atlanta to see if I wanted to move here.
Yeah.
And I already knew once I got there, I wasn't coming back.
You weren't coming back.
Yeah.
For you, did your family talk about race and kind of the things that were happening in our country at the time?
Oh, most definitely.
Inside the house?
So when the years that I remember really, and I actually remember when I was 5 years old and others, we were actually staying in one of the apartments that my grandfather, my mother's father, owned. And it wasn't on the best side of town at all. I could tell some stories about the living there because my mother and father were just trying to get things going. And so then they finally were able to get enough money together to buy a house. We kind of, as they say, moved on up to the east side of town, and they built a house, and we would go and visit it and watch it come up out of the ground. When we moved there, it was a predominantly white neighborhood, but blacks had started to move into the neighborhood, and of course, in most instances, as blacks move in, whites move out. So we started to see that transition. It was around the time, when King was assassinated. I remember very vividly as a child wondering if there was going to be some sort of race war as it related to that. I remember we would see the Black Panthers in the community. We talked about those things. We certainly did. And we lived those experiences. But what was fortunate for me is that I did have a reference point where, because Indianapolis is not as black as Atlanta is, that I did have the opportunity to intersect with people of other races.
Yeah.
By the time I got to high school, it was about 50-50. Black and white, and so we still had an opportunity to interact with each other.
Are you more King or Malcolm?
I think I'm a bit of both.
Okay.
It just depends on the situation. I truly believe that the nonviolent social change is the way to go about it, because I believe when you give power, fighting fire with fire can work, but it doesn't necessarily snuff out the fire. It might make a bigger one.
Sure.
So I really get the nonviolent piece, but I also get the direct action piece. And here in Atlanta, it's interesting how that plays out. But I believe I embrace a bit of both.
Yeah. What do you? I mean, because the time, particularly when King was assassinated, and you look at the 60s, 70s in this country, a lot of the ways that folks talk about race and everything was as if it was just so clean and everything was welcomed with open arms. I mean, King was assassinated.
Yes.
Like, he wasn't. That happened, right? There was not a appreciation for King. Now we got holidays and sales on refrigerators, but I think that there's a kind of a revisionist history in this country on that, and I think that it's interesting how we talk about race today. For you, inside of it, in your mind, when you think about that history, not a lot was achieved from pure just compromise. Why is it that black and brown folks always have to compromise? It feels like.
And we shouldn't have to, but unfortunately, it's the way it is. And I just want to say this: that there is a difference, and that's, I believe, going back to my this is Black Hollywood kind of scenario, is that there's a difference in the Midwest and in the South.
Yeah.
And in the South, here being in Atlanta, being such a black city, there's a different vibe than when I grew up.
Okay.
And so when you asked about, those conversations about race, they came up all the time.
Okay.
It wasn't a unique experience for me to be with some friends and walk out of a pizza joint and have white people come by in the car and call me the N-word, us, or throw throw water on us. Or I remember very vividly one time we were walking through a neighborhood which was still more white. And there were signs up that said black people weren't supposed to be there. And I remember vividly going home and telling my dad, we had to run because they were coming after us. They had these signs that said no black people. And he was very upset, and he got in his car. I don't know what happened after that.
Yeah.
He went over there, and there probably weren't any more signs, and he was probably hoping they chased him out of the neighborhood. So I think, just the way that we embrace it is a bit different from different sides of town. So that's why I believe Atlanta was embracing for me, because here they were able to, particularly in the South, be the leaders in trying to be inclusive. And the compromise piece is because people don't understand the experiences of both people. And until we get a point where everybody is willing to just listen to each other and to try to internalize what it would be like, because it's very easy to be in a space that you don't experience that and you will never experience that, to sort of negate it, versus if you're in that space and you're experiencing it, you have a different feeling about it.
That's super interesting, and I think that's going to segue well into some of the policy conversations I want to have with you. How would your youngest brother describe you? If your youngest brother was sitting here, what would he say? He'd be like, "Oh, you think you know Miss Moore."
Well, my youngest brother was very much a youngest brother. It was like my mother sprung my youngest brother on us. And it was at a time that actually I was very close to my younger brother. I was almost could have been, because there were a lot of teen moms. I could have been his mother. And I think he wouldn't have anything bad to say about me. I think he would say that I was very supportive of him, very nurturing, very protective of him.
That sounds like exactly. Yeah, that sounds like how every brother describes their sisters. That's
that's my youngest brother. My middle brother would probably say I was a bit of a boss. Okay. Because as you go down the line, the oldest child bosses the one next in line, so I bossed him a lot out.
There you go.
And then my oldest brother would say something totally different.
Oh yeah? What would he say?
Oh, gosh. No, I'm not going to say what he would say. But, he's an older brother, and he always picked on me, and we always fought. Okay. We fought, but with loving fights.
I love that. Is there, for you, were you, did you grow up with a strong friend circle in Indianapolis, or did your social circles come later in life?
So I've always had, circle. I mean, everybody calls you friend. But so that's...
It's the Midwest,
right.
So yeah.
But, I mean, in terms of real friends, I always have a small, tight circle of people that I say are truly friends. Yeah. And so I had a friend circle in Indiana. And then when I went to college, I got another set of friend circles. When I came to Atlanta, I developed one. Actually, they came out of my sorors who came here to Atlanta. Okay. And then, just a few people that I met here, and then some that were old friends that I met in college or knew in Indiana.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So, and now in Atlanta, your friends, as they're watching you run for office, what are they texting you? What are they telling you?
Well, they're proud. I mean, they're really proud. They're proud to know me. They're excited. They're more excited sometimes I think I am. And proud to be able to say that they knew me when, and that they knew that I had characteristics to be able to do the type of thing that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Atlanta was, you were brought here after an extended trip. You stayed here. What was the first, where'd you live when you were here in Atlanta?
So when I came for 2 or 3 weeks, I stayed in College Park right by the airport. I mean, right by the airport. I mean, you could see the planes and you couldn't hear anything else. I found out a high school friend lived here, so I moved with her in Midtown. Okay. And then I moved on State Street in Home Park, right by Atlantic Steel. Not Atlantic Station, Atlantic Steel. The very last house there, and there's a lot of stories that go along with that. Yeah. And then after a while, I wanted to be a homeowner, and I finally got an opportunity to buy a house. An investor was getting rid of his property. He was retiring, and I purchased a home in Riverside neighborhood.
Okay, cool. What'd you do professionally in between?
So
in between that?
when I first got here, because of what I was doing in Indiana, I was a communications major, graduated cum laude from Central State, went home, did public relations, also got a real estate license to help with my granddad, and then I also taught at a daycare center.
Okay.
So when I came here, I was looking for something in the public relations field. So I actually wasn't able to move right in that. So I had like 4, 5, 6 jobs. I did inventory in stores. That was, in the back rooms of all these stores early morning. I did inventory, gave out samples at grocery stores for different items that people were trying to promote. I was the Easter Bunny.
Okay.
I was Santa's helper.
You were the Easter Bunny.
Yeah.
And Santa's helper.
Yeah.
Where?
In the malls.
In the mall. That's
yes,
amazing.
I worked for a company that would do pictures for Santa Claus.
That's
so
amazing.
I would take pictures of Santa Claus, and then in Easter, we did Easter Bunny pictures, and I was Easter Bunny.
You were the bunny itself.
Yeah, so we traded off.
Okay.
It's usually 2 or 3 to a crew.
I've been wanting to meet you my whole life.
Okay. So sometimes I took the pictures, and sometimes I wore the costume.
There you go. I love that. That's amazing. What's the strangest experience you had being the Easter Bunny? Like, is there anything that comes to that? You had to have seen some.
Well, it's when some kids were big rambunctious and wanted to beat up the Easter Bunny.
Oh, okay, nice. Yeah.
They will
Sorry about that, by the way.
Punch you. They will punch you. You gotta watch it.
Okay, got it. Is that something that is there Easter Bunny training? Like, do you go to like an annual conference?
No,
or it's like,
no.
I'm fascinated by this.
But the biggest one that I always remember that was so impactful on me when I was doing the Santa.
Okay.
Is we had a group of kids come in from like a daycare center or whatever, and I'll never forget a kid asking Santa Claus for a plate and a saucer and a fork. And I just found that to be strange, and so I, kind of asked somebody to take the camera. I'm like, well, why did you ask for a plate, a saucer, and a fork? And he said, because I'm hungry, and we're always hungry, and I just would love to have a plate. And that always hit me. I'm thinking, of all the things kids can ask for, they come up and ask for the world.
Yeah.
It really, that impacted me that, kids would be really wanting just the basics.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, next Easter, I will come visit.
Well, I am no longer the Easter Bunny, so you missed it.
I don't know, maybe. How would we know? Now I'm just going to ask next time. Are you, do you have kids of your own?
No, I do not.
Okay.
I wish I did, but
okay.
I want to adopt. I may still do it, but
I love it.
I seem to keep letting my public service get ahead of my personal desires.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's... public service in and of itself is raising
yes,
children.
and then you want to do it
parents.
where you know that you're going to be responsible
Of course.
parent, and then, be able to really give the time and attention that they need.
Yeah.
So I find other ways to help kids.
Yeah, fair enough. For you, what brought you into council and public service within Atlanta?
So when I bought the house in Riverside, the very first day I was moving in. My mom and dad were there with me unpacking the U-Haul, and the gentleman drove up in the car and said, hey, we're about to have a meeting. We're starting a neighborhood association.
Okay.
So dad was like, Mom and I will keep doing this. You go with him. And I went with him, and we talked, and before I came back, I said, hey, guess what, Mom and Dad? I'm the president of the neighborhood association. So I started right out.
Sounds competitive.
Yeah, the first time, and then like the next few days, I found out there was a site behind my house that wanted to burn hazardous waste as an alternative fuel source. Then there was a landfill that wanted to get sited, and I got in this fight and that fight.
Yeah.
Did Crime Watch youth programs in the neighborhood, then later became MPU chair for the area, and then had the beautiful opportunity for Gloria Brumell Tanubu, who was a council member in District 12. I had helped her at the latter part of her campaign. She won, and she asked me to come work at City Hall.
Okay.
So I was doing both, being an MPU chair and working at City Hall, figuring out why we couldn't get things we wanted, what worked and what didn't work at City Hall.
You worked for the council member at
I
District
worked
12?
for the council members. So that was like my first I was beginning to study and understand the processes, and then people started asking me to run for council.
Yeah.
And then I ended up running, beating a 2-term incumbent and serving that area for 5 terms.
That's amazing. And so
It's become a progression.
got it. So you went from, you go
A
from
neighborhood
to council
to NPU
to NPU to the council, and then most recently in 2017,
I'm
you
the
ran
president of
you
council.
Okay, and so today it's we're in such an interesting period. I think this election is going to be quite telling of the character of Atlanta in a lot of ways. I think that's what's on the ballot, and so for you. When you were in council, are there any things that you voted for that you would say today that maybe that was not the right decision?
There, I'm sure, because 20 years of service and 20 years of votes can have regrets. There was, and I'm really meticulous about trying to understand, and I'm known for reading the legislation and knowing what's going on. But one got by me. And it by a lot of council people, but for that matter. And it was a piece of legislation that was introduced to us for eminent domain. And eminent domain is something that is not an unusual occurrence, and in and of itself is not a bad thing. And, that's the ability for the city to take property for a public purpose.
Yeah.
But in this instance, the legislation, while I read it and it had the parcel numbers and ID, what it didn't do was identify whether or not those properties were occupied by people. Typically when we do it, it's vacant lots or some outlying parcel. And then we later found out, and this is in the Peoplestown area, you probably heard about that,
Yep.
that there were people in the homes.
Yeah.
And then it became a whole big deal. So the only thing
How does that happen? How do we miss something like that?
Because they did not. Well, you miss it because you don't get it. That's why I was also known for asking a lot of questions, because I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. But in this instance, it was more of a routine thing, and it was never even mentioned that there were people. So what I did to remedy that, and if I find an issue at City Hall, I try to find a way to rectify it for the future, because that was already done. And I did put in legislation that requires, when we do eminent domain, that the department and the legislation has to identify whether or not it's a commercial business or resident, whether it is currently up, used, and occupied by anyone. That way the council can make a better and fuller decision. And so we didn't find out about it until, of course, people say, hey, you're trying to take my property.
This happens a lot, right, where there is misinformed public policy that is pushed and passed by, policymakers. And then a lot of what you get is, whoops, sorry that happened. But that whoops can have generational impact on people.
It mostly definitely can. And, so as mayor, one of the things, and as even as council member and president, I've always pushed for transparency. And so there's going to be a very different feel immediately about how the mayor interacts with the council, because the council is a public-facing entity, and that's where the public gets to see the legislation, gets to see the deliberations, gets to have and bring in the input. And so if I was there in that instance, you would have known what we were up to in the beginning. So then when it got to the council, the public would have been able to fully vet it, and the council would have known, and it wouldn't be a oops later on. But there's never been a good, and that's kind of one of the fights that I've had in all of the years I have with mostly every mayor I've served with, and they probably would say I got on their nerves, is that, I really didn't like the process of interaction between the governing body of the city and the executive.
Yeah, I think that what is the, if you're elected mayor, what's the repair? So there's transparency, which is, I'll be honest, I'll tell you what it is, but then there's the accountability and the repair. I think that what folks who have been pushed out or are on the brinks, who have been on kind of the receiving end of bad public policy, they're kind of like, if that's an oversight that can happen, it could happen to me again. It likely will. And also, now that recognizing it, that's nice.
Well, that
but
particular
what do we do?
one, the remedy for me to make sure that it didn't happen again is I authored and the council passed legislation that requires that.
But what
that
about the folks that
disclosure-
already happened to?
Well, I mean, that's got to be something, because they're right now still in the midst of this, and I don't know that it will be resolved at the end of this administration. And it will be something that my administration will be looking at, and we will take on, and we will find a way to rectify the situation.
But I guess what I'm asking is more general around repair. So there is Atlanta's inequality continues to grow. It is black communities that are getting hit the hardest by it. We know that. There's a highway that will show us exactly where the effects of inequality sit. A lot of that is intentional design. It is poor public policy, intentional design that has affected people directly. And I think that there's a kind of, when we're talking to voters, right, but with a lot of it, they're like, why should I even engage in this process? Because at the end of the day, no one has ever rectified the thing you've already done to me, right? So communities are like, look, you've already done this thing to me. You're going to do it again. Like, and we'll say, oops. So how do we, what does repair look like for those where damage has already been done?
And that's a good question, and I don't have a specific answer because there's so much to be repaired. And
so take one thing and tell me how you would.
Well, give me an example.
So let's go with the folks who, their homes were taken unnecessarily out of eminent domain for the purposes of a development project that might have been prioritized by the city.
Well, I don't think that would happen because it would probably be a private thing. But let's stick with the example that we have now. So first, how you repair it is you've got to figure out where we are. And I know that the eminent domain has already taken place. The city already has access to that property. The property is to be used for some stormwater issues. So what I need to do as mayor is assess the situation. What can we do? Because if they do not want to move, to be able to fulfill the city's need of the stormwater damage and then make them whole on the other end. Or if not, then what can we do to make them whole if they are to move and come to an agreement with them? So I believe first and foremost, the biggest repair will be some conversation and some communication and some action. They've been waiting probably 7-8 years now for some resolution, and I do know that it's also in court, so we have to see where it is legally. But I believe at the end of the day, we can fix it with them.
Yeah.
I don't know about all the other people who've left. Most of them agreeably left, but there are some who do not want to leave. And that's something that I can't give you an answer right now without having all of the information.
So let's maybe then move to safety. How do we repair, the damage that's been done to families by way of violent force that has been used? We got a man that was killed in the parking lot of a Wendy's that was killed by gun force. How do you repair the damage that does to a company?
So I won't talk specifically about any specific case because many of them are probably in some legal thing. But what I will say this is there are a lot of outstanding cases whether they're officer-involved shootings or excessive force by officers that are in the courts that need to have some resolution. And what I want to do as mayor is to try to see if we can, in the instance of repair, get those things to some resolution, whether we can settle with people or whether it's something that we need to keep moving. I would like to have a full understanding of where we are because I know that the city and the law department has typically kept trying to stretch these things out. So you have cases that have been years in the making that have never come to resolution. So I think one repair is to make sure that we go ahead and try to see if we can find a way to resolve it. If not, it may have to go to court.
Yeah.
But we certainly, I think for the families, they would appreciate some decision making.
I don't want to interchangeably use resolve and repair. I think that resolution is important.
I mean, you have to resolve it, and the resolve may be a repair, but to assume that there's a repair, it has to assume that you've come to some resolve. I mean, somebody is right and somebody is wrong. And if the city is wrong, then the repair is a part of the resolve because it's in a settlement, it's in a I'm sorry, it's in whatever it is that you do to say that you did it, but you can't bring back a life.
I understand
I think unbeat someone.
I think this is the challenge, right? With like having there's a technical answer, of course, right? I think what I'm trying to understand is you as like, for example, do you believe that is it true? And you probably have more data than I do on this. Are black communities more over-policed than white communities in Atlanta?
Sure.
And so if that is true, that is a form of damage that has been done for a long time. So there's not just a need for resolution, which is the correction of ensuring that black communities are not, but there's also the decades of consequence that has come from the fact that those communities were over-policed. So what I want to get a sense of is, if you are mayor, how do we not just resolve, but also look back and say, we did some harm. How are we going to resolve for that harm? Like, what does that look like to accept, not only to say I'm sorry, but also through policy and legislation to help folks who have already been hurt by the city itself?
And so I would ask you, what do you define as repair? You're saying, is there a monetary settlement, or I don't know exactly what you are.
I'm just looking for some empathy on it first.
Well,
I think
first
like
of all,
that's
I have the empathy on it.
Yeah.
I believe that there are things that we need to do to move the city forward.
Yeah.
And there are things that have been held off from being resolved.
Yeah.
If you take those two big chunks, that's a lot of work right there.
Sure.
In terms of the repair, I don't know exactly what it is that we would do to repair all of the damage that's done, or even if the city had the capacity to repair. And I would need to know, what does repair look like, and if it's something.
What do you think it should look like?
Well, and I don't know.
Because you agree with the challenge.
Yeah,
right?
and I haven't really thought about the repair part, because that's sort of a restorative thing that goes back. But I believe that repair is a part of the resolve, and it's a part of many of the things that I want to see do, because the city and how we operate, as well as many other major police forces, really needs a culture change. Just like the whole city government, for me, needs a culture change. And so I want to focus on that. And I guess I'm more focused, and my thoughts have been more on focusing on what can we do to change it so that we don't have these conversations, than it is, well, this happened to someone, what do we do to pay? Because I haven't thought about the repair, but you've given me some food for thought.
Yeah, I think it's just, Atlanta is just changing so rapidly that the folks who have been here are like, the city consistently is thinking about somebody else, is thinking about how are we going to build the park for the new employees that are going to be coming from somewhere else. How are we going to develop the road where people from somewhere else are going to have to come in and drive on? But I've been driving on that road for a long time asking for repair. No one wanted to fix that. Now, the neighborhood gets wider, as you said, folks start moving in, and the West End starts to look totally different, right? But the West End's been there. Ashview Heights has been there. English Avenue has been there. Vine City has been there. And so I think that there's almost a feeling of folks are going to have to wait for outside either corporate will or for their neighborhoods to actually get attention.
Well, not in my administration, because a part of my conversation about affordable housing, I'm very specific about the fact that we have a small window of being able to preserve or either lengthen the life of affordability in some of our communities.
Yeah.
And that goes to this strengthening the neighborhoods as they are. And that may be helping, maybe you would consider it a repair, where we would help some of our seniors who want to age in place. They need great things like a roof or flooring or those kinds of things. Those are on the lower income that may not be able to get a home improvement loan to help stabilize their house. Also, education is a big thing, because I want to make sure that property owners who do own property here are not taken advantage of. And I know that I've had many experiences where some constituents knew that I sold real estate, don't do much of it because I've been doing everything else, and I've stopped them from being taken advantage of from scammers. And I believe that we need to look at taxes. So I want to make sure that where we still have some semblance of affordability, that those neighborhoods can be stabilized. And I want to make sure, even with infrastructure, in District 9, I'll use as an example, it has the greatest number of unpaved roads. And people don't realize that there are people who have been living on gravel roads forever.
Yeah.
And those roads kept getting pushed back and pushed back. Those are kinds of things we're going to move forward when we get infrastructure money. These people who have been waiting for so long. There was a gentleman I told, I was so proud when I first got elected because we had the quality of life bonds back there, and I said, we're going to finally get this road paid.
Yeah.
And 20 plus years later, it's still not paid.
Yeah.
There are people who've been waiting a long time to see those improvements come in their community, and I want to make sure that that's where they go.
And so I think that's the truest form of equity, is ensuring that not only do we, not equality right now. Honestly, we can't have that conversation in Atlanta. Right. We just can't. We can't have a conversation of, well, we'll give to this and then also then give to that. We have to say we did not give to this for a long time.
And it's been on the list, and people have been waiting for it, and it keeps getting pushed back.
So how does a mayor prioritize that? Like, what is it that, because I would say, that, Mayor Bottoms is also from Atlanta. I mean, she knows these communities. I have no reason not to believe that she doesn't care about the communities that are there. But, a lot of these communities are still waiting. So is it just outside the purview of the mayor, or is there something that needs to be done in order to kind of ensure equitable distribution of city resources in neighborhoods that have been ignored?
Well, to solve for equity, you've got to know what's inequitable.
Okay.
And so one of the things that I want to do, and we've done something similar to it in Atlanta, but I want to go a bit deeper, is really dealing with neighborhood standards. And I heard this years ago at a National League of Cities conference. I'll have to go back and look up the mayor who did it, but what they did was through the community, actually walked every street in their neighborhood. How many street lights are out? How many signs are out? How many potholes? What streets are in repair? And so then you get those and you create a metrics of a standard. So let's just say it's A, B, C, D, E, and F.
Yeah.
Or not, forget the E. A, B, C, D, and F. Yeah. And then we decide as a city that every neighborhood should be a C. So that means we've got to look at what are the major things that we need to prioritize in those neighborhoods that are rating D and F.
Okay.
And then we make sure that we put those resources there. Okay. That doesn't mean we negate any needs in any of the C and above, but we make sure that we're able to bring D and F up to a C.
Yeah.
And so then you prioritize that first. So every neighborhood should have an average.
It's going to require A and B to give up a little bit, right? I mean, there's got to be a give and take, right?
I don't think you have to give up to give. I mean, I really don't think it's a give up, because if your neighborhood is rated A, then that means your street lights are working, your streets are in pretty good condition, you have your street
because
sign.
You probably can make that phone call,
right?
And
so the D and F doesn't have that.
Correct.
And water's running down the street, the fire hydrants are working. That needs attention.
So what happens when
A prioritize attention?
When person A who's getting an A, when we have folks who make that phone call and now they get put on hold for a little bit more longer because we're actually prioritizing the D's and F's, right? That person is going. That is where you see power dynamics play in this city. We've seen this time and time again. That folks who, folks who got a lot in this city, that we love to talk about equity until it affects somebody else's bottom line.
Here's a rub to that. I don't necessarily agree with that.
Okay.
Because I represented District 9.
Okay.
And it's the only district in the city that actually goes from Buckhead to Donnelly Hollowell Parkway, which people call Bankhead Highway.
Yep.
And so I've represented both areas.
Yep.
And I guarantee you, whether I was on the Hollowell side or whether I was in the Buckhead side, both felt neglected. Everybody felt neglected.
Okay.
They felt like they weren't getting the service level delivery. They felt like one was getting it more than. So let's start with the fact that no matter where, and when I ran for president, when I went around the city you had that same scenario.
Of course people feel neglected.
When
that
you
makes
say
sense.
that, when I'm talking about a neighborhood standard and bringing people up to standards, it's not a matter of because somebody called from A that it's going to keep D and F from getting it, because you're going to identify what the deficiencies are and you're going to have a focused plan attack on getting those.
But that's exactly what's
deficiencies
happening.
fixed.
There's the two places you just represented, Buckhead and Bankhead, have a 25-year life expectancy gap.
Yes,
There's a
most definitely.
25-year life expectancy gap. So yeah, I appreciate that folks in Buckhead and Bankhead are both have feelings of neglect. But one is actually actively being neglected and the other is not. There is not neglect happening in one side. I mean, we have to be.
I'm telling you what people say. You can disagree
But I'm
with
asking-
it. It's not.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, as the representative from that district, both of them had needs that were similar, but mostly they were different. And so I had to respond to those needs. So
course.
majority, 70% of the time, if maybe more, was spent in the areas that had the greatest need.
But you're a data person. You know that the places of greatest need have remained places of greatest need.
And that's why one of the reasons is I'm running for mayor and I'm talking about, you asked me, how do you prioritize that?
Yes.
So I'm telling you how you prioritize that, because not only do you identify what the issues are, but you make the case for where you need to put the resources and
Yeah.
where you need to fix them.
Yeah.
If you have a neighborhood that's a D or an F and it's in substandard condition, then I know as mayor, and there is a lot of power in the mayor's seat, that's where resources need to go.
Okay.
And that's where you go to fix it, so at least everyone is on an average level.
So why hasn't
And
that
if
happened
you're above
yet?
average level, God bless you.
Yeah.
But everybody should be. I can't speak for what everybody else.
But
is.
you've been in administration. I mean,
Well, it's a
you're
political. You pointed out part of the issue. I think that people have prioritized issues around. As I say when I'm talking to people, Atlanta is good about doing the big things.
okay.
We're really an economic development city. We're about the stadiums and the big issues, but we've never been about the basic fundamental issues of the city.
Okay.
And there has been leadership in this city that has totally gotten to the big things, but really have neglected paying attention, even given the conversation that we're having now about prioritizing lifting up the weakest link of the city. And we are only, I believe, as strong as our weakest link. And when I see communities that I represent, no matter how many times I went to pick up tires, no matter how many times I picked up trash, try to deal with code enforcement, try to deal with public safety, are still in the same spot.
Yeah.
You know, I have worked really hard to try to get a track on Hollowell Parkway, aka Bankhead Highway, a grocery store. There's one, and it's below standard probably. We've lost banks, we've lost any amenities on there, and there are people there who need that. And that's because the housing stock was going down and it was going under. Now there's a whole new sea change that's happening there, where you're having speculators come in and purchasing up these properties, and now gentrification is beginning to happen.
Right, because there's not those protections in
right,
place.
right.
I mean, I think that this city has over at least the past 2 decades prioritized the needs and the perceived neglect of particular neighborhoods and has ignored the same neighborhoods that you've been picking up tires from and all of that. This is just, and the pandemic it's shown such a bright light on
Well,
that.
I don't disagree with
Yeah,
you.
so I'm just
not disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying, I will not be the mayor,
Yeah.
and in 8 years I can't resolve all that, and I can't repair all
You already
that.
elected
But I
yourself to a
can-
second term.
Almost definitely.
Okay.
I mean, it will take more than a minute
Sure.
to even make an impact.
Sure.
So I don't believe in that time frame that I will leave office and I have not made a significant dent in trying to work it so that whoever the next mayor is, people are going to expect that things go on. Just like when I
Yeah.
ran for council member, I said, well, I want to be the council member I want to have.
Yeah.
I want to be the mayor that I want to have. And I want to have a mayor that is going to focus on the weakest links of our city and strengthen them, and making sure that we do those repairs so that we don't have D and F communities.
Yeah.
That everyone is at least average or above.
Yeah, and I think those quote unquote weak links have been
Weak.
unhatched. Like it's not. They are beautiful. They are strong. They are such resilient communities. These are the types of folks that grew up the way I grew up, right? Like there's just a. So for me, it's like, I think when people are thinking about who they are considering for mayor, there's a lot of promises to take care of the communities that have been left behind, but not as much. Then it just seems like people come into office. I mean, the narrative is always around that. Then when folks actually come into office, it's like, well, it's just unfortunate, but like, so-and-so brought a check to the table. So-and-so, what, they're funding it. A foundation came in and said that they're going to put the money up for it. So it's really out of my hands. And I think...
But that's where the power of the mayor comes, to get them to do it what's right in the right community.
Would you continue to offer tax incentives in the same way to corporations through Invest Atlanta?
I can't say that I wouldn't offer tax incentive to a corporation. I do believe it's on a case-by-case basis, but I want to change the nature of how we're using them incentives to actually incentivize them to go where we need the service.
So I'm going to ask you the same question as I was talking about with the neighborhoods, which is tax incentives to me are in the same way, where we can resolve how we do it in the future. Damage has been done. Also, there has been very limited accountability for the damage that has been done. I have watched tax incentives be given out to large developments that with promises of community, not just community like giving and like turkey giveaways. This was like, we're going to hire folks from the neighborhood. We're going to train folks. Folks are going to have jobs. You won't believe what this development is going to do.
I've been around.
I know you have. And so for me, as a frustrated resident, I sit and I'm like, none of that happened. Right. It just didn't happen. And there's no accountability for it.
So there's two things that can happen. One, we certainly can go back and look and see where those unfulfilled promises are, and see if there is still room, because some of these incentives don't last but 10 or 20
But hold
years.
the person you gave the incentive to accountable for not doing it. It's a contract, right?
We can see if we can do that. But first of all, you haven't elected me mayor yet.
No, I haven't.
And
I'm trying to figure out whether we should.
And that's where I'm getting to. So what I'm saying is, if you elect me mayor, then I'm not making those kinds of promises. That's not how I've served. That's not my track record, and that's not what I'm going to do. I'm not making promises that I'm not going to fulfill. You're wanting to definitely look at some of the things that other mayors have done or have not fulfilled those promises. To the extent that we can, I certainly think that we can look at those things, but at some point, you've got to decide, are you going to put your foot on the gas and go forward, or are you going to put your foot on the gas and go back, or are you going to kind of be in that clutch position where you're trying to decide? I believe that there are so many critical issues facing this city that when I get in office, we've got to deal with the critical issues that we have before us, making sure that we're prioritizing how we're spending money, what we're doing. You all haven't elected me mayor yet. I'm not going to misuse the money. I am not going to be influenced politically by outsiders, friends, family, or whatever about what we do. I am going to do as much as I can, as you say, to look back at some of the things that we're doing. But mine is a prospective. How can we move forward and set standards, boundaries, obstacles, or whatever, so that whether I'm mayor and in 8 years there's a new mayor, that they have to operate in a different way.
What's the number one charge that you have for the future? The first thing that you're going to prioritize as mayor?
Well, first and foremost, the city of Atlanta, across the city, wants to make sure our neighborhoods, no matter what area, no matter what zip code, is safe. And I believe, frankly, that the public safety issue that we're having in the city, it threatens our brand, it threatens our greatness that we are now, and it threatens what we want to do. So that is going to be a major and primary focus. The second thing...
What are you going to do about it? Let's just stick with that. What are you going to do about it?
So there are 5 areas that I think that we really need to focus on. First and foremost, the community. I believe, as you know, I told you I was a neighborhood president. We need to go back old school and do some of the things that we did when I was neighborhood president, like crime watches. You know, we've gotten away from the active engagement and involvement of the community of watching out for neighbor. But I would like to extend that to businesses doing the same thing, high rises, apartment complexes doing the same thing, making sure people do things to not become victims of crime. And so that's going to be a large education component and a large engagement component with the community. The other are our children. That's a big piece, not for just now, but in the future, how we can really lean into our kids. Kids want to work, using our workforce development agency, getting it working so that our youth can have an opportunity to make some money. Getting our recreation centers used in a whole new and different way. Right now we just maybe have basketball, swimming, but I really would like to engage our unions and our union leadership to bring in electronics, bring in some of the trades, and maybe get the kids sparked interest into doing things, STEAM, science, technology, engineering, and math. One of the ideas I have is really working with the public schools to see if we can get them to drop the kids off at the rec center after school. So then we can help them with their homework, feed them a meal, and then let them go home later.
So crime watches, get some activities for the young kids.
Yes.
What else?
Well, code enforcement is a big issue.
Okay.
I like nightclubs. This goes with my place. But we do need to make sure that they understand that a lot of activity is taking place in and around the nightclubs, and they have to follow the rules. And I will be calling those beverage license holders to a meeting to make sure they understand that we're going to enforce the law, and that we need to get the people in place.
Okay.
And we need to be consistent about it. The other thing is the courts. That's really the big piece. Our officers arrest people, but our court system continues to let out repeat and violent offenders. And I think the city can be very helpful, particularly if someone's a first offender or if they've committed a crime and they've already committed the crime and they've done their time, to see if we can use our workforce development agency to help get them job readiness training, and if they so choose, because will be a personal choice, to try and see if we can get them some jobs where they can do some things productively in the life as opposed to whatever they were doing for criminal activity. And then there are other ways that the city can work with or work on the courts and be supportive. And then finally, of course, getting our officers' strength back up. We've lost a lot of officers, and I would love to see, and I just heard the chief is doing it, is getting some of the administrative officers on the street and working. I want to have a 24-hour 911 on-call behavioral and mental health crisis team that can respond to those calls, that are not armed, that are professionals, that can help deal with that, because officers aren't trained for that, and they need to be able to push back for that. So those are just a few of the areas, because there's no magic. There's no magic,
but the solution to poverty is money, right? I think that at the end of the day, there's a lot of folks who, when we talk about public safety, it's almost like every initiative, everything we go to is around criminal activity, right? There's but public safety is also about making sure that people are financially secure in what has been the most most dynamic and terrifying crisis in recent history, and I think that to me, I think that there's a fear, right, of the communities. We started this conversation with, black communities are already over-policed, already. And there's a fear that we say we want more officers, we want to make sure that, we're enforcing the code, we're doing a lot of these things. A lot of folks hear that as we are now going to even more police in black neighborhoods and communities.
We're just going to do what we're supposed to be doing. I'm not saying that we need to do anything extra, but I do think that in order to have public safety, you got to have public safety. You got to have officers. Who else is going to?
I just watch what people actually. I mean, I appreciate the enforcement of the code, but weed in one side of town and weed on the other side of town gets enforced very differently.
Well, I don't disagree with you. So that's a whole nother piece of the conversation is how do we reform the culture in policing and how we police in the city.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother conversation from just the public safety, the piece.
Look, I don't feel safe sometimes when I go to Buckhead. I don't, right? And it's not because the streets aren't beautiful and the places aren't posh, and it is the way that sometimes you are treated in one side of town by an officer versus how you're treated on another side of town by an officer, depending on whether you have sneakers on or whether you got nice shoes on. This is Atlanta. I'm listening to Outkast in a place that is policing the very communities that Outkast came from. So I think for me, policing it's an interesting topic because it's not a binary. The assumption of when I start saying things like this, or if a progressive person says, look, like, we feel over-policed, is that, oh, you hate the police. Oh, you hate public safety. That's not the case at all. There is a fear, though, I think, of a lot of the candidates who just aren't speaking to public safety in the way that I think people want it to be talked about, which is with the nuance that is required, where we don't always have to just talk about police officers and crime when we're talking about safety.
And I don't disagree with you because I've had experiences with police, and that's why, as mayor, and I said that's another conversation because I got a lot of bullet points under that. I'm a black woman. I've lived the experience. My family has lived through the experience. I've had my father, one of my brothers, really brutalized by police officers. I had good friends that have done that. I've had experiences right here in Atlanta with officers, that don't have good attitudes when you approach them. We talk about de-escalation training. My thing is, why do they start off with the escalation? Because you start the conversation. So I know and I understand that experience. And that is one of the things that I want to work on, making sure that we have leadership of the department that shares my vision that I want our police officers to do their job and keep us safe, but I also want to be sure that citizens feel safe in their interactions with police. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Of course, yeah.
We can do both of those things.
Yeah. You said that you don't want to make promises that we cannot deliver on. A promise was made to the residents of Atlanta that the detention center would be used, would be shut down. That was what it would be, shut down.
Who made the promise?
What's that?
Who made the promise?
We had both council and the mayor made the promise.
Okay. I would just say, because I'm going to stop you there.
Please.
And this is one issue as president, I kept driving home because I didn't want this conversation to get misconstrued.
Okay.
The mayor made the promise
that
she was going to do the detention center. And I kept pressing the council. The mayor is out there in the public telling everybody we're going to close the detention center. Council, what are you going to do? You need to make a policy statement either in support of it or different than that. What came out was legislation that said that they wanted it to have the study.
Correct, yes.
It didn't say we're going to close it. It said that we were going to study.
And what did the study say, though?
But it didn't say that we were going to accept the study. It didn't say that whatever the study came out with it was going to be. So when you say the mayor and the council, I just kind of push back on that because I know the mayor made that promise. When it kept back to the council after the study, then I kept pressing the chair of public safety. You all need to make a definitive decision. Are you supportive of what the study says to close the jail or you're not? And to this day, I don't think there has ever been a definitive statement from the policy-making body of the city to close the detention center.
But the report, the study said, right, and we were part of that commission.
We know what the study said.
Yeah, so
because the study said it, unless the council adopted that as a policy position of the city, you've got a study and you've got a mayor saying we want to close the jail, but the reason why it hasn't been closed is because the council the policy-making body of the city hasn't made it definitive.
Fair enough, right? I mean, I think that there's not I am not.
And I don't agree with closing the detention center.
So-
I'll just make that very clear.
Why do you not
right now.
agree with?
Because first of all, the citizens of this city have put in their money and they paid for this facility. When I went to tour Fulton County's jail, which is, as you know, has been asking to lease space in that facility, it brought me to tears. It's inhumane. The building is functionally obsolete. It's cramped. It's nasty. People are sleeping on the floor. And then I did a tour after that. We did a tour of the city detention facility.
Yep.
And as you know,
I've done that
on
tour.
a good night, you have about 20 people in a 1,300 bed facility.
Sure.
It's spacious. It's up to date. The kitchen actually works. The dry room in the kitchen is dry and not water leaking. It does not make sense to me why we would, particularly when a large number of the people in the Fulton County Jail are actually people that Atlanta has arrested, why we would not allow them to use a facility that's already made as a jail.
Because there was a public commitment, whether it's by the mayor or not,
Well-
right? I mean, the mayor is our I mean, on one hand, we're talking about
But the
power
mayor
of the
cannot
mayor.
in and of herself make law.
Of course,
And
right.
so all I'm saying to you, and this is more
Yeah.
wonkish for those who are not into it, but that's why I kept pressing the council. And if the council had made that decision, we would be having a different discussion. I may or may not have agreed with it, but there was no official, we're going to close the jail.
But were you on council, you would have said that we should not close your position is we should not close the jail.
If the vote for whether or not to close the jail came out, I would have not supported.
And then the reason is because Fulton County is not fulfilling their responsibility for ensuring that the facility that they are responsible for is not being maintained and taken care of in the way that it needs to.
Well,
It's
it's not about
deteriorating.
Fulton County, it's also about Atlanta.
Okay.
Because, and this is kind of going back, years ago, we made sure a lot of those offenses actually went to Fulton County versus coming to the City of Atlanta jail. So then we did increase the population. If you remember, we had another jail, which is now the Gateway Center, that we did turn into what people are asking, something that would be helpful in the community. So when we are saying that we're arresting people, whether it's being held at Fulton County because they have a state offense or whether at the city because they have a city offense, it doesn't matter. These are human beings.
Of course.
Most of them are innocent because they haven't been proven guilty. They're awaiting trial. And I just don't see why you have a facility that is humane and clean that you can't or won't allow a county in which you sit and prisoners or inmates in which you've arrested be able to use that facility.
Because there was just I think the point is
so
that
then
rehabilitative services. I'm just saying that there's a opportunity for federal, state intervention, county intervention. The city is now taking on that responsibility as opposed to taking on the responsibility of rehabilitative services, ensuring that programs and services of folks who are coming out
But
are not
I think
coming
both are
in.
happening. I think the county is doing that, and I know, as I talked about, where it's appropriate for the city, because city doesn't do the health and human services pieces. The city can do that, but while we're having this wonderful debate, there are people sleeping on nasty floors in crowded conditions in a COVID pandemic environment in Fulton County.
Yeah, we should talk to Rob Pitts about that. What is the solution that he has for that?
They have asked to utilize unutilized space in the city detention center, and I don't see why they shouldn't be able to do that.
Got it. It didn't come to this, but were you voting on, were you to be the tie-breaking vote on Cop City, would you have voted yes or no?
On the public safety training facility, I would have voted yes if I was a tie.
Okay.
Because Cop City is interesting, and it's a good marketing tool to call it Cop City, but let's make sure that we're
Cop and firefighter city.
Well, it's for the police, it's for the fire. There's also a component of it that will help where people can learn how to drive and training. and that will be used by other departments like our Public Works Department and other departments that need driver training. So it will be a public safety facility that also has that component.
And why did it have to be that facility? Once again, a promise that was made in the design, the Atlanta City design, a lot of sustainability promises that were made, a lot of park-related promises that were made. Why that facility, and why did we not look at more facilities?
Well, and as I understand it, there was a look at other properties that went on. If I was mayor, we would have handled this totally different. First of all, let's go back to the city design. The city design is an aspirational document that the city adopted. It's not, in everything in there is not set in stone. It is what the city should aspire to be, and it's a guidepost for this to look at as we move to develop and increase all of the people who are going to be coming into the city. So that let's start there. The second part of it is, unfortunately, it was not handled correctly because I heard about the facility maybe a year and a half ago.
No.
But I actually had heard about it a year before that. And when I finally got presented the plan, I said, you know what, you all need to go and start having conversations with the community because I heard about this. There's a Facebook page and everything. And what I was told was, yeah, we would love to do that, but we've got to get the mayor's office on board first. We don't want to get out in front of the mayor's office on this. And so here we are, fast forward to this point, it comes up, and I'm so glad the council at minimum said, wait a minute, we're going to give it 60 days to get public comment, and then, as you know, it got held, and they got other public comment.
I mean, that was a facade.
Whether it's a facade or not, I'm just saying that it wasn't as much public comment and engagement.
There was no engagement after that. We watched all of. There was no engagement.
Let me finish. The point that I will say is what little engagement or inadequate engagement that was involved. I did see some movement. We did get the acreage of the property reduced and more commitments in terms of tree replacement and an ability to really work on the final plans on how it's going to be sited. And so I know on the other hand, because, I could have been like some of the other candidates and just not made a decision on it or try to split the fence, but I think it's important for people to understand what would I have done. And the reason I would have supported it most importantly is both the police and the fire training facilities, unfortunately, are just almost non-existent. And we desperately need to make sure that we have that, and we do have some assistance in how you fund that. Because other than that assistance, it would have fallen all on the citizens of the city. So
sure.
I just think that when I
Prioritization,
take all of the things involved, if I had to make a decision, I would have voted.
Okay. I'm going to take some questions that have come in. We've got some folks that have come in online. I think as I'm taking these questions, I think what the conversation we're having, and we have just a couple more candidates that are that we're going to be talking to, is one of like especially progressive movement building work. Mm-hmm. Folks who have been on the ground pushing to solve inequality in this city, who have seen its deep rootedness. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are frustrated with candidates because they. And I've heard that, a lot of when I was asking folks, what should I be talking to council member Moore about or council president Moore about, it was just, I don't think she's a progressive. Mm-hmm. I don't see
I would say I'm more of a moderate progressive. I mean, there are things that I'm more progressive on than moderate. And you get one thing that you will get with me, whether you're a progressive, a moderate, whatever you want to tag yourself in, is you're going to get from me the truth. I'm going to tell you what I think. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with it, and I'm not going to give you promises that I'm not going to keep. So if nothing else, look at me as a candidate that what comes out of my mouth is what I'm going to do or what I'm not going to do.
Sure.
And it doesn't mean that we're going to agree with each other. So if people don't tag me as a progressive, perhaps I'm not, if I don't agree and line up with everything you do. But one thing I do know, because progressives have gotten a bigger voice, and I appreciate that voice in our conversations, but one thing I believe is it's not all your way or nothing.
Well, there's no
And
power
so,
to
and
it.
so, and so, my thing is, I'm always willing to have those conversations, and I'm always willing to be open and listen. But that doesn't mean I have to always agree.
Sure.
I am a grown woman, and I have my own mind and my own way of thinking. And I'm also willing to listen to other people's way of thinking because I'm always evolving as well.
Sure.
So I may not be as progressive as people would like me to be, but I'm certainly not as conservative as you may think that I am.
Sure.
I believe that I'm moderately progressive, and I can move progressive, extremely progressive in some areas, and some areas not.
Yeah, got it. Okay, we'll take a couple questions.
Sure.
So this question comes from Zara Alabanza, and she's asking, if you don't get elected, what will you do next?
Oh, well, I will continue my life. I don't need to be elected to be anybody. Felicia Moore before and be Felicia Moore after. I don't know. I expect to be elected and to use that time to finish serving the city in a capacity that gives me the authority to get some things done. If I'm not, by some miracle, I will find something to do that will continue to be progressively accessible and helping the city. I don't think I'll go away.
Yeah.
But I think I'll maybe I'll go earn some money. How about that? I just thought about that. Maybe I'll go make some money and I will adopt my child.
There you go.
Yeah.
Love it. Next, we'll go to the next question. This question comes from Coleman Tyler. Coleman says, Campbellton Road is a great example of how Southwest Atlanta has declined over the past 30 years. What are your thoughts and vision to revitalize this area?
And that Campbellton Road is a perfect example. When we talked earlier about incentives, I think we do it backwards. We wait for people to come with the project and ask for an incentive versus us saying what we want to see and then offering incentives for those who can bring that to. So what we need to do on like Hollowell Parkway, for the areas that still have a part for a vision, Hamilton Road, some of our major corridors, is work with the community and say, what is the vision? If you had your choice, what would you like to see? If it's X, Y, and Z store, then we go to them and say, hey, we have an incentive for you if you're able to move here. That's how I think we get, use the incentive to benefit what the community wants.
So would you direct that through Invest Atlanta?
Most
What would be
definitely. And the mayor is the chair of
Correct,
Invest
yeah.
Atlanta. So how they move or not move, really the mayor has a lot of power with the Invest Atlanta.
Got it. Okay, cool. Next question. Cool. Sorry, they're scrolling to it. Okay. Next one is talking about CBAs, so community benefits agreements.
Mm-hmm.
So for community benefits agreements, should they be enforceable? Should they be held accountable? What do you feel about community benefits?
Well, first of all, I think when we having big major projects, I don't think that we have the capacity to do it on every project, but when we have big major projects, and we should have engagement of the community, put them in an agreement, and let the community, I'm big on transparency, understand what parts of those CBAs are enforceable and what are not.
Yeah.
So what the city can take on and say you have to do X, Y, and Z, particularly if it's tied to an incentive,
Yep.
it gives us a little bit more authority to say these things. But sometimes there are things that are outside of zoning or outside of our purview that really is more of an agreement between the community and whoever the development is.
Yep.
And so that also means that for there to be some enforceability on those things that are outside of the city is when we have community negotiating these agreements, that they have a legal entity that can be tied to it so that you can have a civil remedy if you don't get what they said.
Okay. And so have you seen a CBA go right in this city? I mean, we've talked about...
I haven't seen any CBAs in the city.
Okay. So...
I've heard from,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of desire for them, stadiums and other things, but I have not seen one happen.
Yeah. There were a couple of questions that came in before this. One was around your relationship with the past two mayors, right? Which is, we were looking at even just your voting record. You were definitely not afraid to vote against kind of the position of Mayor Kasim Reed at the time. It is no It is absolutely, I think, no secret that you and Mayor Bottoms do not see eye to eye a lot. That has been stated publicly. That has been stated of, I remember when we met with you. It was about a year and a half into you being council president. We had asked if you were able to meet with the mayor or talk to the mayor.
Let me say this about Mayor Bottoms, because I was not a council member, so that was a different relationship.
Sure. Yeah.
Please understand that I had always reached out to, and still have my arms open to have conversations and to develop a relationship with the mayor. But reaching out does not mean people reach back. And so it's nothing on my side that has any issues or problems with her. I've always reached out to her to be able to meet and talk and be collaborative. She just has not reciprocated.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. And it's very difficult to, you can speculate, but most times when you speculate, you're wrong. The only person that can answer that would be her.
Okay.
But then again, I don't think that I'm the only one. I think, she has a very close circle of people that she talks to, and it's not always everyone.
Got it. Is it unusual for council and mayor to be disconnected, or is it hand in hand? What would that look like in your administration?
Well, it will be different because I've lived through it.
Yeah.
So let me say that. But there's always been, I think, some disconnect. Different mayors, different connection points. The main thing that the council that will be serving with me during my administration, we will be having an open and collaborative opportunity to talk. I will be inviting them to my cabinet meetings, not all of them, but there will be specific ones where we'll let them come in so that they can hear. They won't have to do as I did as a council member, get up in the morning and read the AJC to find out what's going on at City Hall. They would actually be sought after and engaged. Because I look at the council, having been there, I'm not going to disrespect them because I was in that position. And I know what they want and what they need because I know what I fought against. Mostly it was
Mayor Bottoms was also a council member.
Yes,
as well,
it was no information flow, no communications. That was the main issue. And then inadequately being able to answer questions about policies that were before us.
I mean, there was also concern of when the mayor has a position on something. There's a lot of backroom deals that happen, right? And not necessarily in this administration, but certainly well documented in the previous one. So I think the question is how do you prevent or how do you actually create transparency in decision making, but also allow autonomy for the council to be able to actually discuss the issues and vote with their conscience, but also with data.
Well, where you can, unless there's some legal issue that would keep you from being transparent because you have to protect the city's position legally. If it's anything that you can at least give people heads up about, hey, there's a major company, or I'll just use that as coming to the city. We're working on some things. I can't disclose who it is now, but I want you to know this issue is going to come up, because you do have to have the ability for the mayor, who is the sole person who has negotiation authority in the city, to get those negotiations, and even the public has to understand that and bring something that can be presented before the council, which is also the public-facing ability of the city. So that needs to happen, but where you can always let people know about it. If it's not something that's legal or top secret, it's just a matter of people being engaged, because I'm going to tell you, this city is facing so many issues. We talked about crime today, but just basic city service delivery. We have the affordable housing, we have our shelter, we have infrastructure needs, and the list goes on and on. It's going to be an all-hands-on-deck approach, and one mayor is not going to be able to do it by themselves, and the council has to be on board and engaged and involved. The public, I'm not going to take on all of this by myself. The public is going to know where we're deficient and where we need help, because you got to go along with me along the way to help resolve these issues. And I tell some people, one day I was just sitting there thinking about all of the things that we have to deal with the city, and just when I was about to get in that moment of despair, this breath of fresh air came across me, because I realized whether it's your organization, other nonprofits, the corporate community, our faith community, our colleges, our universities, all these great institutions we have in the city, we actually have every resource we need to resolve these issues.
Yeah.
It just takes a leader like myself, and I will be open to allow other people to come in and help us resolve
What
this
role
issue.
does community voice play in, I mean, because versus data, right? It sounds like, I mean, I think the conversation we just had, there are places where, I think that it feels like if I have, I mean, we commissioned a study. A lot of community engagement organizations were involved in that. A lot of work went into that, and it was kind of like, thank you, that was cool. And this happens in our NPUs. NPUs, when there is activity, I mean, it's an imperfect system, but almost by design. I think there is a feeling of, well, even if we do say something, still we're going to see it go.
I've been there.
Go this way.
I was an MPU chair, and what people fail to want to recognize is that you elect officials, and so that's why it's important who you elect, because you elect officials who make the final decisions. And so the advisory nature of that is to advise that. When I was a council member, I realized it wasn't just one set of facts that you have to make a decision on. Yes, you listen to what the community says and you want to address that, but you might have other components and issues that you have to look at in order to make that decision. Just as we talked about the police and fire training facility, while I understand what the community needs, and I have always been one for public input, and I definitely did not support the way that it went down. But then I had to think of myself, I had to step back and say, okay, what other components are going on here, and what is in the best interest of the city overall when you take into account the fact that you need a facility, and if we don't use this opportunity, what does it look like if we don't get started on this, because we have police and fire that have really essentially.
It just felt like a prioritization issue.
I got you.
That's all. I mean, I think at the end of the day, no one is disagreeing that the facilities of the police department and the fire department are deteriorating. Mm-hmm. There is no disagreement there. That is a fact. There's also no disagreement that legacy homeowners who have been here have homes that are deteriorating, right?
Exactly.
There's so it comes down to a prioritization issue of where we spend our time, our dollars, and then to have such overwhelming public response to something felt like a leadership opportunity to either show us the data where the public is wrong or is not correct, because they're definitely bringing data around.
Well, I heard, and let me just say this, and just to be fair, I listened to the public comment. And so when you have a public comment, is not the data by which you make that decision.
Of course.
If you have a group that's more organized than the other, you're going to get one.
There's no disagreement there.
So you can't use that as a thing. But,
But how do we use it?
How do we use it?
Of course, we can't use it as the end-all, be-all. But in what way should it be used? Because otherwise it's a waste of time,
definitely,
right?
No, it's not a waste of time. And I do think that it's a criteria by which you make a decision. And council had to make a decision based on the criteria that they heard. And that included the public comment, those that were in support of it, as well as those who were not in support of it. And what the public fails to realize is every time you say yes or you say no doesn't mean that the council having to take in all that they have to take in is going to necessarily support what the community wants.
Yeah, but
and you need to be, if you're making a decision, and that's one thing that I've always prided myself in, I may not make the decision that everybody wants, because you can't. You're not going to win either way. Somebody's going to be mad on either side, but you should be able to explain why you did what you did.
Yeah.
And why you supported it. Doesn't mean you'll agree with it, but you should have an explanation.
What will community engagement look like for, I think that there's a lot of these organizations that are like, we could say what we want. At the end of the day, a lot of these folks are going to make the decision they want to make based on whatever it is. Maybe there's other data and other places that are more important or take prioritization. We knew where public response was. There was data shared around that. There was polling done around that.
On both sides of the issue, that's what I was going to say earlier. The narrative that was used in support of or against, there was not always adequacy accuracy, should I say?
Of course, yeah.
In both sides of the narrative.
Yeah.
So you've got competing narratives going there.
Yeah. So for you, there's also a relationship that you will need to have with the state. So where there's no kind of surprise that there has also been conflict, I think, between the state and the city. So if you are the mayor, there's going to be times in which folks are like, okay, the state is kind of bullying the city or is telling us to do something that we don't like. Do you think that the way that we handled mask mandates was appropriate? Was there a defense of Mayor Bottoms on that, or was there a better way to have done that? What would your relationship be if you have a counter to the governor?
Let me say this. I don't want to second guess how the mayor and the governor has had a relationship. I will speak to my relationship with the state. When they wanted to take over the airport, I definitely was not supportive of taking over the airport. So I made sure I was there. My face was there. I was the face of don't take our airport. I was at every hearing. I made sure that I sat down with the author of the legislation, Senator Burke Jones. I drove to Jackson, Georgia to be on his own turf. We were supposed to have a half-hour meeting. We met maybe 2.5 hours and talked. We didn't agree, but we did have a conversation. And I've met with the governor several times. And the lieutenant governor. We did a Black History program together. He gave me an award. He put me on the Georgia Freight and Logistics Commission. I had an opportunity to meet other Republican leadership. So it's about relationship building. Doesn't mean you're going to agree on an issue. And I guarantee you, I was total disagreement with the airport, and they knew it, and I made the case when I stood before that mic, but it didn't become a personal fight.
Yeah.
It became a policy fight.
Yeah.
And I think as long as you can keep it on a policy fight, and people know your position, nobody's surprised by the other and what they say or do.
Got it. There were two other questions that came in around street racing and the music studios.
Okay.
So when I was talking to a few artists that I know that were asking about, I was just like, what do you think about the mayor's race? What's going on? They are holding something. They are holding some resentment or some anger about restrictions placed on music studios, nightclubs. There's a feeling of okay, well, if Council President Moore is elected to be the mayor, this is going to be a crackdown on the culture. It's going to be a crackdown on the things that make this city's culture thrive.
So this is a perfect example.
How do we talk to them?
Yeah. So let me say this. This is a perfect example, and I'm glad you brought it up. How politics is a very dirty game.
Yeah.
So when I was running in 2017, when I was running for president, there had been a series of issues at nightclubs.
Yeah.
I mean, not nightclubs, excuse me, recording studios.
Yeah.
And residents wanted something done. And I said, well, you can't.
What were their issues? Was it noise or what was it?
We were having people who had bullets lodged in their homes. There was a lot of noise. There were a lot of shootings. People dying. And this is very close to residential.
People were dying at music studios?
Well, being shot.
Okay.
Outside of them.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of activity taking place. But mostly, the consistent thing was the noise. And so I said, well, one thing we can do is we can see if we can get recording studios to move a little further from a residential house, so when they site. And so I came up with asking that they get a special use permit and be at least 300 feet from the closest resident.
Okay.
Just to make sure that would eliminate, and then have adequate soundproofing so that they wouldn't impact the neighbors. Not saying that you cannot have recording studios or whatever. And so this is where the politics came in, because a certain person who was in higher office didn't want to see me become president. I will just say people. And
I'm confused. Who are we talking about?
I'm just saying other elected officials.
Okay, in Atlanta?
In Atlanta city government.
Okay.
I can tell where they took that and went to recording studios and told them I was trying to shut them down.
Are we talking about Kasim Reed?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, yeah, his administration, and
Okay.
it was another council member
Okay.
that was involved in it as well. And I remember very vividly because I spent maybe 10 hours straight just responding to people on social media, which I tried to do to try
Yeah.
to, I'm not shutting anybody down. This does not impact currently sited studios. So nobody had to move, nobody had to shut down. This would be prospective for any new studios that came in. Anyway, it kept getting twisted, and even more recently, someone who is involved in all this, is very big influencer in social media, brought it back out and said I was trying to close studios, which is not true.
Yeah.
So it's being used and twisted, and unfortunately, people are picking up on the misinformation versus the information. At the end of the day, because of all the controversy this swirled around it, council members who had signed on backed off.
Yep.
It was voted down. I did support it, and we moved on. But because it can drive a wedge between the entertainment industry and me, people keep pushing out this misinformation.
Yeah.
And people go by what they hear.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily looking at the legislation or looking at the news to see that I was not shutting down any music studios. I love music. I like to dance. I like the nightclubs.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, so I just think that this is shows this is an example of how politics is used as a wedge issue.
And so for street racing, similarly, and it's just always, these issues are always kind of brought up as culture issues. It's never a I
didn't bring it up as a culture.
That's not what. I'm not claiming that. I think that what I like about you and what I've always appreciated about you is that you and I can nerd out on data. We can nerd out on like the policy, the nuances of what it means. What does this word mean? What does that word mean? I appreciate that is something that you bring to the table. I think it gets lost often among folks who are trying to understand and preserve culture in this place, because there is and I get in trouble for this sometimes too.
Well, it gets lost if somebody sends them down the wrong path.
Of course.
If you feed misinformation to people and tell
It's
somebody
wildfire.
Somebody is threatening you, that's why I'm trying to say that's the political slant to it. Then unfortunately, it's an easy thing to say. I get it, and I respond to it whenever I can.
And you did respond to it. I think for me, it's more about how do we find that. But I guess why I'm bringing up street racing is because there's probably a really good policy response to street racing. There is a good policy response to music studios. I think there is just a feeling of cracking down on the very services that the activities that are usually done by young black men, right?
Street racing is multicultural.
Yes, that is true. In Atlanta, right? So in Atlanta, there are a lot of activities that there are other ways that we could go around it or other ways to communicate about it. But it always seems like we're cracking down on these specific activities. We're not cracking down on other activities.
Well, there are activities, and here's the thing. Atlanta is made up of a lot of people, and the culture is a part of it. However, I believe that people should be able to have the quiet enjoyment of their property.
Okay.
So I don't, if you want a street race, go and have the street racing in an appropriate area. But up and down a residential street, blocking off hospitals where people are in ambulances trying to get care, blocking off intersections, using explosives and fireworks, and actually people getting hurt and injured by that activity because someone wants to do it. There has to be a balance there. When you say cracking down, it's not a matter of cracking down, it's a matter of the fact that you can't do that. I mean, there are some rules.
I think that we are taking the obvious consequences, the extremity of consequences that come out of particular activities that happen there. There's no question that those things need to be addressed. I think the question is how do we address them in a way that doesn't also remove it from the actual, like, for music, for even if people feel or believe, so if your administration comes in, has a bunch of great policies, but people don't understand it or don't feel aligned with it or don't feel it actually speaks to them, oftentimes there is a disconnect between the mayor and the general public to say, they just don't get us. They don't understand us, or they're not for us, right?
You had those conversations, and if I was to go back to the music studio thing, I think that where I failed in that is to have those previous conversations, because I had those conversations with the community.
Yeah.
That's what they wanted and were on board.
Yeah.
But I didn't have those conversations with the greater music industry, and maybe I would have gotten more of a nuance in how we approached it and been able to lead the narrative versus letting the narrative be written after the fact.
Yeah, because oftentimes it's legislation that comes down on these things, as opposed to maybe what a community conversation could happen. And not that conversation is going to solve everything, of course.
Exactly.
If we're preventing basic human services from being delivered, then that's problematic. But figuring out how we can actually buy into also alternatives that might be a little bit more effective than code enforcement work.
Yeah, if it's doable, yes.
Okay. So last couple of questions for you, and then I know we have to wrap. But I wanted to talk about transparency, and I want to talk about corruption. So there's no surprise you have ran on transparency in for a long time. I saw the open checkbook come up. There are a few things that have happened around transfer. I mean, there was proposals of commissions to happen around transparency, but Atlanta doesn't really feel very transparent still, right?
There's a lot of work to do.
Okay, so what do we do as?
So what we've done now was the first thing that I wanted was the open checkbook. It needs to be updated, and it needs to be more user-friendly, downloadable, accessible, and more timely.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about transparency in many other areas. Anything that touches the city that we have authority over needs to be transparent. Invest Atlanta needs to be more transparent so that people see how that money is being spent and where that money is going. And then it's beyond money. It's, what are we doing in the city? And what are our activities? We need to have that online. And the public safety space is another place where I think we need to be a lot more transparent. If we have an officer-involved shooting or incident, we can use the what I'm going to call Transparent Atlanta website to make sure that we get that body cam video out there in 72 hours or less. And I would like to see the less. That we can make sure that we get the officers' records up online, because of course the person, whoever was in it, if they have a record, the media is going to have that before that. I think that they're, making sure that the process of how we handle it is out there so people can see. So nobody's questioning what's going to happen next and who has the case. Because if it's an officer-involved shooting, the GBI has it, and what is their process? What is the time frame? I just think that there's so many ways that we can utilize technology to get information out there. Now, people aren't going to sit at home and go to it, but if you want to know, it ought to be available.
Okay, got it. And in terms of how transparency can actually lead to the reduction of corruption, how do we address, maybe things that have already taken place? What is the way of it just doesn't feel like there was ever a resolve of.
Well, so right now, what has taken place, you have the FBI that is involved in the Justice Department that is looking into those things. So this cloud that's over City Hall is still there, and COVID has sort of stretched out the latter part of it, and we will continue to hear about this for years, and it's costing us dearly. It's a lot of money just in responding to that, $30 million and climbing. So that, that has not been resolved. But one of the things I'm very proud of as president of council, because I wanted to make my focus making sure that we can start to get beyond this corruption, is I authored legislation for the Inspector General and compliance officer. So we have the first ever inspector general and compliance officer of the city that can hold people accountable internally.
Okay.
And they're independent from any elected body. So maybe we can get to things and nip them in the bud before they get to the feds. And then the other thing I did, I authored and the council passed legislation for independent procurement review officers. And I came up with that because as a council member, when procurements would come to us and there were questionable things, the only person you can ask the question of is the very person who's trying to get you to pass it.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't get the answers. And I said, well, what if we had someone else who was reviewing this and could give us a report that we can know and trust before we vote on stuff? And so that's what they do. They go through procurement from beginning to end. And I'm proud to say that other governmental entities, as well as other auditors across the country, are using it as a model.
Okay.
And we pulled some procurements because of it.
And so in administration, it would be to address procurement policy. Is that the pathway to?
Wherever I find, so the independent procurement review officers was because I knew that a lot of our issues were procurement related, where
Yep.
people were skipping processes, not adding up sheets, that kind of thing. Wherever I find that there was a way that someone could do that, I'm going to put up an obstacle or a barrier.
Yeah.
You know, even if it means as mayor that I limit the authority and power that I have as mayor
Yeah.
to make sure that because it won't be my administration, but the next administration or the administration later has barriers and obstacles they would have to go to be corrupt, because
Yeah.
it hurts our brand. It diminishes public trust in the government. So all the issues we talked about, all of this is connected. Some people are like, oh, forget about corruption. I just want the city safe or whatever. But it is important because it's a fundamental issue of trust in your elected officials.
Yeah, it's the trust is at, we know this, at historic lows. People do not trust that government is going to follow through on what it is that they say they're going to do. They don't trust anyone's word. It doesn't matter, blue or red.
Right.
At the end of the day, there have been so many broken promises to communities, so many opportunities to actually do the right thing, and oftentimes it just feels like it's for someone else's benefit. And in this city, that's a challenge for folks.
Well, and I just want to say to people, one thing they'll get from me is I'm going to hold myself accountable. And so that's why I'm very careful about what I'm going to say I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it, because I will deliver on what I say I'm going to do. And if I find I get down the road and there's something that is impeding me from being able to do that, I'm going to be transparent, open, and honest with the public. Hey, I said I was going to do X, but A, B, and C came in. I can't do it that way. I had to change it for this. I just think people need that communication and that honesty and openness. And so that's what they're going to get out of me. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with me. Doesn't mean I'm always going to agree with you.
Yeah.
But you will know what I say. My word is my bond.
Yeah. I mean, the moderate progressive is not always the push. There's always a push to say, we got to do better. I mean, equity requires us to do better. We recognize that compromise is sometimes necessary, but I think folks are just tired of compromising on their basic needs. It's always, and the way that government is set up as something that you have practiced, I have studied, is just, it's sometimes a self-fulfilling prophecy of just reinforcing the status quo power that exists. And it has been that way for so many people, and there's a lack of trust that it is going to get any better.
Well, if you keep electing status quo power elected officials, then you're going to get that. I mean, I've been in city government, yes, and I've done my job and I've served in the policy realm, but I guarantee you, I have been the outsider that just somehow made it on the inside, and many times they wish I had never made it in the door. And so you need to be able to have elected officials that have demonstrated integrity over time. Again, not always agreeing with them, may not be as progressive as you may want them to be, but you know that at least you can trust their word.
It's just that, our streets were filled last year with so much emotion, so much outcry. And this isn't new for Atlanta. I mean, this isn't new for black and brown folks to be crying out about these things. And there's just a feeling of we're like, we want justice reform. We want like wages that are fair and livable for people. Folks should not be on the street when we got, multi-million-dollar developments that are happening. We should not be prioritizing, the needs of one neighborhood over neighborhoods that have been just neglected for years and years and years. And it's like, and we want to feel safe too. We want nice neighborhoods too. And there's this feeling of the response to it is like, okay, here's a nice, cute little program, right? That might be able to help. But there's not the like bold, we are going to fight for those things require corrections, not to execute and enforce government as it is today, but to reform government, to completely change its behavior, its function, and its purpose, to actually serve those who may be called a weakest link or be called the folks who this city is actually built on the backs of, who constantly get the receiving end of the narrative, but never the receiving end of the benefit of that narrative. And so I think that's the push. And what I want to end on is that I think it is super important. We have recognized through some of the research that we have done that this work, whether it's political or entrepreneurship work, we are constantly putting Black women at the both the point at we have to have you call out the problem and come up with the solution, right? Whereas it is, I want to know there are a lot of young Black women who are probably looking at you as a leader. And are inspired by you. And I know that this difficult, this journey is not necessarily always easy. Do you feel that there are things that you can or cannot say because of who you are? And if not, how did you get to that point to be able to do that? If so, how do we make it so we remove those barriers so that stops happening? Because there's only, I believe, it's 2, maybe 3 Black women that are running for the position of mayor. Is it 2? I believe.
I think it's 2.
2, yes. So two women that are running for for mayor of Atlanta, in a city that was built off of the work and the legacy of Black women. When we talk to a lot of Black women, they sometimes say, I don't know if I'm going to put myself out there. You put yourself out there. I don't agree with necessarily everything you say, but I think you definitely are bold in what you want to say. Do you feel that you're still not able to say everything you want to say, or are you saying everything that it is that you want to say? And then how did you get to that point?
On social media, I sure would like to say a lot more than I would say. I just leave that out, but I'm pretty free with my words, but responsible as well.
Got it.
Because a lot of times, as an elected official, whether you're a Black woman, Black man, white, whatever you are, you have to be careful about what you say because there's always ways for things to be twisted in a way that you'll end up finding yourself responding to something like I did for the music studios for hours and hours and hours trying to make sure that the narrative was correct. Disagree with me if I wanted a special use permit and that the music studio should be 300 feet from a home, but don't be mad at me for something I didn't say, which is close down any studios or keep any studios from being built. So that's the kind of thing you have to be careful of. But other than that, I don't bite my tongue because it hurts. And I don't hurt myself, so I speak my mind.
And for Black women who want to see, Black women in leadership, your message to them, to younger Black women who are pursuing leadership and in positions where they sometimes don't feel like they're able to do that.
Well, what I say is, sort of the story of how I even sitting in this chair to you talking about being mayor wasn't something that was on my to-do list. I wanted to be president. I thought that was going to be the pinnacle of my career. But just start where you are. Just like I did as a neighborhood person and doing the work in the neighborhood with the people. And, just take those opportunities as they come and be free to let the universe guide you to where you should be.
Fair enough. I appreciate your time as always. I know we've taken a lot of it. I think people will get to know a little bit more about who you are and what you fight for.
Good interview.
Always try it. So we have an election on November the 2nd. It is vital that everybody votes. You can learn more at civicatlanta.org and voteatl.org. We're grateful for your time, and
Thank you for
we hope the
having me.
voters will come out. Where can people find you to learn more?
Please join our team, and that is Felicia Moore from Mayor.com. And we have plenty of opportunities for you to intersect, help engage, and let's win this race.